The rain had found a new way into my apartment. It was a persistent, methodical drip, landing on a warped floorboard with a sound like a tiny, mocking clock. Each drop measured another second of my life spent in this drafty room above a bakery that always smelled of burnt sugar and regret. My life was a series of these small, accumulating failures. A graphic design business that folded, a relationship that evaporated, and now, a roof that had surrendered to the relentless Pacific Northwest drizzle. I was 28, and my primary ambition had shrunk to keeping my laptop dry. It was in this state of quiet desperation that I first truly noticed Mr. Julian Croft. I had seen him before, of course. In a town as small as Port Blossom, he was an institution, as fixed and reliable as the lighthouse on the point. He was the architect who had saved the old town hall from demolition, the quiet benefactor behind the library's new wing. He was older, maybe 50, with a stillness about him that seemed to absorb the town's anxieties without ever showing a ripple. His hair was more silver than black, and he wore well-made coats that looked like they could turn back the wind and the rain by sheer force of will. My observation of him had, until then, been distant. An admiration for the solid lines of the buildings he designed, a flicker of something I couldn't name when I saw him walking his golden retriever along the shore, his face turned towards the gray wash of the sea. He was a widower. His wife, Eleanor, had been a beloved figure, and her loss 5 years ago had settled a permanent quietness around him. He was a part of the town's landscape, a landmark of quiet strength and unspoken grief. I had kept a small, folded newspaper clipping in the back of my wallet for 3 years. It was a photo of him at the dedication of the library wing. He wasn't looking at the camera. He was looking at a portrait of his late wife, and on his face was a look of such profound, gentle sorrow that it had stopped my breath. It was a look that spoke of a love so deep it became a part of a person's architecture. I didn't know why I kept it. Maybe it was a reminder that such things were possible, even if they seemed impossibly far from my own leaky, solitary world. The catalyst arrived in the form of a formal-looking envelope, thick as cardstock, slipped under my door. It was not a bill or an eviction notice, my two most frequent correspondence. It was an invitation, or rather, a summons. Mr. Ethan Glass, it read in elegant, severe type. Mr. Julian Croft requests the pleasure of your company for a private consultation at his office. Thursday, 10 o'clock. My heart hammered against my ribs. A consultation? I was a designer of logos for coffee carts and websites for dog walkers. What could a man like Julian Croft possibly want with me? My first thought was that he'd somehow heard about my rent situation, about the leak, and this was some kind of pitying offer of charity work. The thought made my throat tighten with a familiar, bitter pride. I resolved to go, listen politely, and refuse even more politely. I would not be a project. His office was in a restored brick building downtown, one of his own designs. The interior was all clean lines, warm wood, and the hushed, expensive scent of leather and old books. It was a space that felt both imposing and deeply calm. He wasn't sitting behind his large mahogany desk when I was shown in. He was standing by a wide window that overlooked the harbor, his hands clasped behind his back. He turned as I entered, and the full weight of his presence settled in the room. Mr. Glass. Ethan. Thank you for coming. His voice was lower than I'd expected, a calm baritone that seemed to vibrate in the floorboards. It was a voice that didn't need to be raised to be heard. Mr. Croft. I managed my own voice sounding thin. You wanted to see me. He gestured to one of 2 leather armchairs near the window. Please, sit. He didn't take the chair behind the desk, the seat of power. He took the one opposite me, creating a small island of equality in the grand room. It was a deliberate choice, and I noticed it. I noticed everything about him. The way his gray eyes assessed me, not with judgment, but with a quiet, penetrating curiosity. The fine lines around them, testaments to years of smiling or squinting at blueprints. The strength in his hands as they rested on the arms of the chair, capable hands that had built things that would last. I have a proposition for you, he began, his gaze direct and unwavering. It is unconventional. I ask that you hear me out completely before you make a decision. I nodded, my mind racing through a dozen unlikely scenarios. None of them came close to what he said next. He explained it with the calm precision of an architect detailing a blueprint. His late wife's will contained a peculiar clause. She had co-founded a charitable trust with him, dedicated to funding arts programs for children in the region. The final, most significant disbursement of funds, enough to build and endow a permanent arts center, was contingent upon him being remarried by the 5th anniversary of her passing. My jaw must have dropped. He gave a small, wry smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Eleanor had a flair for the dramatic, he said softly. She worried I would close myself off. This was her way of pushing me back into the world. A well-intentioned, if slightly meddlesome, final wish. The deadline was in 6 weeks. He explained, no interest in a real romance, not yet. But he was deeply committed to seeing their shared dream of the arts center realized. Therefore, he needed a temporary, contractual marriage, a partnership of convenience, a business arrangement, he stated, his eyes holding mine. For 1 month. Strictly confidential. You would be compensated for your time and your discretion. Generously, he named a figure that made the air leave my lungs. It was enough to clear my debts, put a down payment on a small studio, and live without the constant, gnawing fear of financial ruin for at least a year. It was a life raft. But the question hung in the air, heavy and unspoken. Why me? I finally asked, my voice a whisper. He leaned forward slightly, his expression serious. I've been aware of your work for some time, Ethan. Your designs have a clarity and an integrity that I admire. I've also been aware of your circumstances. He said it without a hint of pity, a simple statement of fact. You are responsible. You are discreet. And, if I may be blunt, you are someone who understands the importance of honoring a legacy. I believe you would treat this arrangement with the respect it requires. He saw me. He didn't just see the struggling designer in the threadbare coat. He saw something else, something I thought I had lost. Integrity. Respect. He wasn't offering charity. He was offering a contract, a job. An unconventional one, to be sure, but a transaction between 2 consenting adults. I thought of the dripping water in my apartment, the constant, wearying battle to stay afloat. I thought of the quiet dignity of this man, who was willing to enter into a sham marriage to honor his late wife's dream. And I thought of that newspaper clipping, of the profound love it represented. To be, even for a month, a part of that world, it was a gravitational pull I couldn't resist. There would be conditions, I said, finding my voice. Boundaries, of course, he said immediately, his expression softening with what looked like relief. Everything would be outlined in a legal document. Separate rooms. No expectations beyond a public appearance of partnership. Your privacy and autonomy would be paramount. You can walk away at any time, Ethan. This is your choice. The soft gravity of his reassurance settled over me. He was offering me not just money, but safety. A harbor. I looked at his steady, capable hands, and I made a decision. I chose the harbor over the storm. Okay, I said. I'll do it. And just like that, the foundation of my life shifted. Moving into Julian Croft's house was like stepping into a different dimension. My entire apartment could have fit into his entryway. The house was one of his own designs, a masterpiece of wood, glass, and stone nestled into a bluff overlooking the Sound. It was beautiful, masculine, and achingly empty. The silence within its walls was vast, broken only by the distant cry of gulls and the soft ticking of a grandfather clock in the hall. It was a house built for a life that was no longer lived within it. My room was in a separate wing. It was larger than my old apartment, with a private balcony and a view of the water that stole my breath. The bed was dressed in crisp, cool linens that smelled of lavender and sea air. It was a guest room, luxurious and impersonal. Julian had been clear. My space was my own. He was a man who understood and respected boundaries, not just in architecture, but in life. The first few days were a study in quiet observation. We were 2 celestial bodies who had entered the same orbit, circling each other at a careful, prescribed distance. Our mornings began in the kitchen, a vast space of stainless steel and warm maple. He would be there first, reading the paper at a large island, a mug of black coffee steaming beside him. He would look up when I entered, a quiet, "Good morning, Ethan," his voice a low rumble in the stillness. I learned his routines. The coffee, the walk with his aging retriever, Buster, the hours spent in his study, a room lined floor to ceiling with books on art, history, and engineering. I would sometimes pass the open door and see him bent over a drafting table, the lamplight silvering his hair, his focus so complete he was unaware of my presence. He moved with a quiet competence, a man utterly at home in his own skin, in his own well-ordered world. I, on the other hand, felt like a ghost haunting the edges of his life. I spent my time working on my freelance projects at a small desk in my room, acutely aware of the sheer luxury of my surroundings. The crushing anxiety about money had vanished, replaced by a new, more complicated tension, a low-humming awareness of him, of his presence in the house. I was constantly listening for the sound of his footsteps on the hardwood floors, the soft click of his study door closing. I found myself analyzing his smallest actions. When he passed me a bowl of fruit at breakfast, his fingers brushed mine. It was nothing, an accident, but a jolt of warmth shot up my arm. I pulled my hand back as if burned. He didn't seem to notice, or if he did, he gave no sign. But I noticed. I replayed the moment in my head, dissecting the brief contact, searching for meaning where there was likely none. He was a man of quiet, thoughtful gestures. He noticed I drank herbal tea in the evenings, and the next day, a box of my preferred chamomile blend appeared in the cupboard. He saw me squinting at my laptop screen, and the following morning, a high-quality external monitor was on my desk, still in its box. There was no note, no grand announcement, just a quiet act of care, an observation made and acted upon. These gestures were more unsettling than any demand would have been. They were kind. They made this arrangement feel less like a contract and more like something else, something I was afraid to name. One afternoon, I was in the library, a two-story room with a rolling ladder, trying to find a book on local maritime history. The one I wanted was on the highest shelf. I climbed the ladder, my hand gripping the wooden rail, and stretched for it. My fingers brushed the spine, but it was just out of reach. "Allow me," his voice, coming from directly below me, was so unexpected I nearly lost my footing. A strong, warm hand landed on my lower back, steadying me. It wasn't a casual touch. It was firm, deliberate, and utterly grounding. The heat of his palm seemed to seep through my shirt, spreading through my entire body. "I've got you," he said softly. I froze, my breath caught in my chest. I was acutely aware of his proximity, of the solid presence of him just behind me. I could smell the faint, clean scent of his soap and something else, something uniquely him, a hint of cedar and paper. He held me there for a second longer than necessary, his hand a solid anchor. Then, he reached up, his arm brushing against mine, and easily plucked the book from the shelf. He stepped back as I climbed down, my legs feeling unsteady. He handed me the book, his fingers brushing mine again. This time, our eyes met. In his, I saw a flicker of something, an awareness, a question. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by his usual calm neutrality. "Thank you," I murmured, my voice hoarse. "You're welcome," he said, his gaze dropping to the book in my hands. "It's a good one. The chapter on the old cannery is particularly interesting." And then he was gone, leaving me standing in the silent library, my back still tingling where he had touched me. The weight of his gaze, the soft gravity of his touch, these were not in the contract. They were uncharted territory, and I felt myself drifting into them, anchorless. That night, I lay awake in the huge, comfortable bed, listening to the sound of the wind moving through the fir trees outside my window. I was safe. I was financially secure for the first time in my adult life. I was living in a beautiful house with a kind, respectable man. But I was not calm. My mind was a whirlwind of analysis. I thought about the way he paused sometimes before speaking, as if weighing each word for its precise meaning. I thought about the warmth in his hand, a warmth that felt like more than simple body heat. It felt like a current, a communication all its own. He was a man who communicated through restraint. The things he didn't say, the touches he didn't make, were as loud as any declaration. He was 49, I was 28. He was a millionaire, I was not. He was a pillar of the community, I was a transient. The power imbalance was a chasm between us, and yet, in moments like the one in the library, it felt as if a bridge had been thrown across it, fragile and terrifying. I was terrified of what it meant to want to cross it. I was terrified of what I would be giving up, the carefully constructed walls of my solitude, the simple, if painful, clarity of being alone. The arrangement was supposed to be a fortress, protecting me from the harsh realities of my life. But I was beginning to realize that I was in a different kind of danger now. The danger of wanting the man who had built the fortress. The first real test of our arrangement came a week later. Julian was hosting a small dinner for 2 key members of the Arts Center's Board of Trustees. It was an informal event, meant to reassure them that he was stable, happy, and moving forward with his life, thus fulfilling the spirit, if not the romantic intention, of his late wife's will. My role was simple: be present, be pleasant, and be a believable partner. The afternoon before the dinner, we found ourselves in the kitchen together. Julian, I discovered, was a surprisingly good cook, but he was flustered by the details of hosting. Eleanor always handled this part, he admitted, a rare crack in his stoic facade. He stood in the middle of the kitchen, looking at a stack of fine china, as if it were a complex architectural problem he couldn't solve. "Let me," I said, stepping forward. It felt good to have a task, a purpose beyond simply existing in his space. "I used to work in catering. I can set the table." He looked at me with a gratitude that was so open, so unguarded, it made my chest ache. "Thank you, Ethan." For the next hour, we worked side by side. It was a simple, domestic ballet. I arranged the place settings on the long, formal dining table while he prepared a salmon en croûte, his large, capable hands moving with surprising delicacy. We moved around each other in the quiet, spacious rooms, a comfortable rhythm developing between us. There was no talk of the contract, no talk of the board members. We were just 2 people, preparing for a dinner. As I was placing the last of the silverware, he came to stand beside me, holding 2 different sets of wine glasses. "Red or white?" he asked, not about the wine, but the glasses. "The wider bowl for the red," I said, pointing. "It lets it breathe," he nodded, looking at me with a small, appreciative smile. "Of course. You know about these things." "A few things," I admitted, feeling a warmth spread through me that had nothing to do with the fireplace crackling in the hearth. We were standing close, our shoulders almost touching. In that moment, the cavernous house felt smaller, more intimate. It felt like a shared space, a place we were building together, even if it was just for one night. This feeling of partnership, of being equals, was a dangerous and intoxicating thing. It made the pretense feel real. Later, as we were getting ready, Julian knocked softly on my open bedroom door. I was struggling with the knot of my tie, my fingers feeling clumsy and thick. He was already dressed in a dark gray suit that made him look distinguished and impossibly handsome. He stepped inside, his eyes on my fumbling hands. "May I?" he asked, his voice low. I nodded, my throat suddenly dry. I stood still as he came closer, his presence filling my personal space. He smelled of crisp linen and that faint, cedar scent that was uniquely his. His fingers were warm as they took the silk ends of the tie from my hands. He was gentle, his movements economical and precise as he looped the fabric. His knuckles brushed against my jaw, and I had to force myself not to flinch, not to lean into the touch. My eyes were fixed on his face, so close to my own. I could see the fine web of lines at the corners of his eyes, the slight furrow of concentration in his brow. His gaze was focused on his task, but I felt it on me, a tangible pressure. The air grew thick, charged with everything we hadn't said for the past week. When he was finished, he smoothed the knot against my collar, his thumb lingering for a moment on the pulse point at the base of my throat. My heart was hammering, a frantic bird trapped in my chest. I was sure he could feel it. His eyes lifted to meet mine. The calm neutrality was gone. In its place was that same unguarded expression from the kitchen, but deeper now, more intense. It was a look of raw, unvarnished vulnerability. "Ethan," he began, his voice barely a whisper. "I need to be certain you are comfortable with this evening. With all of this. This was a business proposal. If at any point it feels like anything else, if you feel pressured, you must tell me. Your comfort is the most important boundary we have." He was giving me an out. He was reminding me of the contract, re-establishing the lines I felt myself so willingly blurring. He was being honorable. He was protecting me, even from himself. And in that moment of profound, gentle care, a door I had kept locked for years swung open inside me. The fear was still there, but it was joined by something else, something stronger. A deep, resonant yearning to be worthy of this man's decency. Here I am, I think. This is the moment. The air is different now. It is not just charged, it is alive. His hand is still resting lightly on my chest, over my heart. I can feel the warmth of it, a steady, solid point in a reeling world. I meet his gaze, and for the first time, I don't look away. I let him see the truth in my eyes. I am comfortable, Julian, I say, and using his first name feels both shockingly intimate and perfectly natural. The only thing I'm not comfortable with is the pretense. It's a confession. A terrifying, liberating confession. A flicker of understanding, of something akin to hope, lights his eyes. He doesn't pull away. He doesn't retreat behind the safety of our agreement. He simply stands there, with me, in this new, uncharted space I have just created. The tie looks good, he said finally, his voice a little rough. He dropped his hand, and the loss of his touch was a physical ache. They'll be here soon. He turned and left my room, leaving me with the ghost of his warmth on my skin and the echo of my own reckless honesty hanging in the air. The foundation had settled. The roles we were meant to play had been irrevocably altered before the curtain had even gone up. The dinner was an exercise in subtle tension. The board members, a married couple named George and Margaret, were pleasant but scrutinizing. George was a retired banker with eyes that seemed to be constantly calculating value. Margaret was a woman draped in pearls and polite, probing questions. They observed Julian and me, looking for the cracks in our story. Julian was magnificent. He was a gracious host, steering the conversation with an easy confidence. He spoke of our plans for the house's garden, of a trip we were hoping to take. He included me in every anecdote, his eyes finding mine across the table, a silent question in them. Are you all right? Each time, I would give a small, almost imperceptible nod. I'm here with you. I played my part, speaking about my design work, about my appreciation for Port Blossom's quiet beauty. But with every word, I was intensely aware of Julian. I watched the way his hand rested near mine on the white tablecloth. I felt the light brush of his knee against mine under the table, a contact that was likely accidental but sent a shockwave through my system. The tipping point came over dessert. Margaret, with a smile that was all teeth, turned to me. It must be quite a change for you, Ethan, she said, her tone syrupy sweet. Moving into a place like this. Julian is so established. It's wonderful that he's found someone to take care of. The implication was clear, sharp, and ugly. I was a project. A kept boy. The familiar shame and anger rose in my throat, hot and bitter. I opened my mouth to defend myself, to assert my independence, but Julian spoke first. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the clinking of spoons against porcelain. Margaret, he said, and the single word held a universe of warning. He didn't look at her. He looked at me, and his gaze was filled with a fierce, protective warmth. Ethan takes care of himself, he said, his voice level and firm. He has more integrity and strength than almost anyone I know. I am not taking care of him. I am lucky enough to be his partner. He reached across the small space between us and laid his hand over mine on the table. It wasn't a gesture for them. It was for me. His thumb stroked the back of my hand once. A solid, reassuring gesture. A public claiming. An undeniable truth. The silence that followed was thick with the weight of his words. George cleared his throat, and Margaret's smile faltered. The power in the room had shifted entirely. Julian had drawn a line in the sand, not with anger, but with quiet, unshakable conviction. He had defended my honor, but more than that, he had validated my worth, not just to them, but to me. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. The board members left soon after, their goodbyes noticeably more respectful. When the sound of their car faded down the long driveway, Julian closed the front door, and we were left standing in the grand entryway, bathed in the soft light of the chandelier. The silence was different now. It wasn't empty. It was full of everything that had just happened, of everything that had been building between us for weeks. The air was electric. Thank you, I said, my voice barely audible. For what you said, he turned to face me. The careful distance he usually maintained was gone. He was standing close, close enough that I could see the flecks of gold in his gray eyes. I only said the truth, he said, his voice low and intense. This was it. The loaded interaction. The moment where subtext became text. Julian. I started, not sure what I was going to say, only knowing that the silence had to be filled with honesty. He took a small step closer. Ethan, he said, his voice a soft rumble. The contract we signed, it has become insufficient, my breath hitched. I know, I find myself wanting to protect you, not because you are weak, but because you are important to me. I find myself wanting to share my home with you, not as a guest, but as more. These feelings are not in our agreement. His gaze was searching, vulnerable. I have no right to them. And what if I want you to have them? The words came out of me in a rush, a torrent of pent-up yearning and fear and hope. What if this stopped being a business arrangement for me the day I walked into your house? The confession hung between us, shimmering and fragile. This was the point of no return. He could retreat now, back to the safety of our contract, and I would have to let him. I had laid all my cards on the table. He didn't retreat. He took another step, closing the final space between us. He raised a hand, not to touch me, but to hover in the air near my face, a gesture of profound hesitation and respect. "Is this all right, Ethan?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. "I won't assume. I need you to tell me." He was naming consent. He was balancing the power, handing it all to me. I leaned forward, closing that last fraction of an inch, my cheek brushing against his warm, waiting palm. It was my answer. It was my yes. A shudder went through him, a deep, resonant tremor. His hand cupped my jaw, his thumb stroking my skin with an infinite tenderness. His other hand came to rest on my waist, a steadying, solid presence. The world narrowed to the space between us. The grand house, the contract, the world outside, it all fell away. There was only the warmth of his hand on my skin, the intensity of his gaze, and the clean, cedar scent of him filling my senses. He lowered his head slowly, giving me every opportunity to pull away. I didn't. I couldn't. I lifted my face to his, my eyes fluttering shut. "This is real," my mind whispered. And then his lips met mine. It wasn't a kiss of explosive passion. It was something far more profound. It was a kiss of arrival. It was gentle, unhurried, a soft pressure that felt like coming home. It was warm and solid, like the man himself. It tasted of expensive wine and a truth so deep it settled in my bones. All the yearning, all the observation, all the unspoken tension of the past weeks melted away in that single, perfect contact. There was no imbalance of power, no debt, no obligation. There were only two men, meeting in a moment of pure, unvarnished honesty. He deepened the kiss slightly, a soft groan rumbling in his chest. I wrapped my arms around his neck, pulling him closer, my fingers tangling in the soft, silver hair at his nape. My other hand rested on his chest, right over his heart, which was beating as hard and fast as my own. This kiss broke the contract. It shattered the careful framework of our arrangement into 1,000 pieces. This was not pretense. This was not performance. This was the most real thing I had ever felt. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless. He rested his forehead against mine, his eyes closed. His hands were now gripping my waist, holding me to him as if he were afraid I might disappear. "Ethan," he breathed, his voice ragged. I couldn't speak. I could only lace my fingers together behind his neck and hold on, anchoring myself to him. We stood like that for a long time, in the quiet hall, breathing the same air, our hearts beating in a new, shared rhythm. The legal document in his study, with its clauses and conditions, was now just paper. The real contract had just been signed, without words, in the silent, certain language of a kiss that was right and unforced. It was a contract of the heart, and its only term was a new beginning. The next morning, I woke to the pale, gray light of dawn filtering through the window. For a moment, I was disoriented, adrift in the unfamiliar luxury of the room. Then, the memory of the previous night rushed back in. The dinner, Julian's defense, the confession in the hall, the kiss. Especially the kiss. A flush of heat spread up my neck. A familiar tendril of anxiety began to curl in my stomach. What now? The clear, simple lines of our arrangement had been completely erased. We were in a new territory without a map, and the old power dynamics, his wealth, his age, my dependency, felt more potent than ever in the harsh light of day. Last night felt like a dream. This morning felt like the consequence. I got out of bed and dressed quietly, my mind a storm of uncertainty. Was he regretting it? Would he retreat into polite, distant formality? The thought of losing the fragile connection we'd forged was a physical pain. When I entered the kitchen, he was already there, standing at the counter, his back to me. He was wearing a simple, soft-looking gray sweater and jeans, and he seemed smaller, somehow. More human. Less like the imposing Mr. Croft and more like Julian. He didn't seem to have heard me come in. The silence stretched, and my anxiety grew with each passing second. I was about to retreat, to give him space, when he spoke without turning around. "The coffee is fresh," he said, his voice quiet. I murmured my thanks and poured myself a mug, my hands trembling slightly. The air was thick with a different kind of tension now, not the slow burn of attraction, but the awkward uncertainty of the morning after. I stood on the other side of the kitchen island, the wide expanse of granite feeling like a canyon between us. He finally turned, his coffee mug held in both hands. His face was etched with a seriousness that made my heart sink. "We need to talk, Ethan," he said. This was it. The regret. The gentle letdown. I braced myself. "Okay." He gestured to the chairs at the island. "Please." We sat opposite each other, the same way we had in his office on that first day, but everything had changed. He looked down at his mug for a long moment before meeting my eyes. His gaze was clear and direct. "Last night," he began, "was not part of our agreement. And I am not sorry that it happened. I need you to know that. But it changes things. It invalidates the contract." I nodded, my throat tight. "I know. The legal arrangement was designed to protect you," he continued, his voice steady and earnest. "To ensure there was no coercion, no sense of obligation. Now, that protection is compromised. I cannot, in good conscience, continue with it as it is." My heart plummeted. He was ending it. He was sending me away. The safety, the warmth, the feeling of being seen, it was all about to be taken away. "I understand," I said, my voice hollow. I started to stand up, to make it easier for him, to show him I wouldn't make a scene. "I can pack my things." "No," he said, and the word was so sharp, so forceful, it stopped me in my tracks. I looked at him, confused. There was a look of alarm on his face. "Ethan, sit down. Please. That is the very last thing I want." I sank back into the chair, my head spinning. He reached across the island and placed his hand, palm up, on the cool granite surface. "An invitation. What I mean is, the business arrangement is over. I'm tearing up the contract. The payment I promised is already in a trust for you. That doesn't change. It was payment for services rendered up to this point, for your discretion and your time. That part is finished." He took a deep breath. "But I am hoping we can start something new, something real, without contracts or deadlines, without any pretense at all." His hand was still there, open and waiting. His eyes were full of a raw, hopeful vulnerability. He was offering me a choice, a real choice, free from any financial entanglement. He had deliberately, carefully, removed the power imbalance as much as he possibly could. He was reassuring me not just with words, but with a profound, practical action. Slowly, I reached out and put my hand in his. His fingers closed around mine, warm and strong. The relief that washed over me was so immense it almost brought me to my knees. It was a wave of pure, unadulterated hope. "Yes," I whispered. "Julian, yes. That's what I want, too." A slow smile spread across his face, a genuine, unguarded smile that reached his eyes and made them crinkle at the corners. It transformed him, erasing years of grief and solitude. "Good," he said softly. "That's very good." We sat there for a long time, hands linked across the counter, the morning sun finally breaking through the clouds and streaming into the kitchen. We were starting over. The test of our new, undefined relationship came sooner than I expected. A few days later, Julian needed to pick up some architectural plans from the town planning office. He asked if I would come with him. It was a simple errand, but I knew it was more than that. It was our first public outing as whatever we were now. Not employer and contractor. Not fake partners. Just us. Walking into the small, bustling town hall with him felt different. Before, I would have been trailing a few steps behind, an anonymous assistant. Now I walked beside him. He didn't hold my hand. It was too soon for that, too public, but there was an invisible cord of connection between us. He kept glancing at me, a small, reassuring smile on his lips. And then we saw him, George, the board member from the dinner, standing by the clerk's counter. His eyes widened slightly when he saw us enter together, a flicker of surprise, and then calculation in his gaze. My old instincts kicked in. I wanted to step back, to create distance, to fade into the background. My face grew hot, anticipating the judgment, the gossip that was sure to follow. But then Julian did something simple and profound. He rested his hand on the small of my back, a light but firm touch. A gesture of quiet possession and solidarity. It wasn't for show. It was for me. A silent message. We are together in this. He guided me forward, toward the counter, and gave George a calm, friendly nod. George. Good to see you. George's eyes flicked from Julian's hand on my back to my face. Julian, he said, his tone a little stiff. And Ethan? Running errands? Just picking up some plans, Julian said easily, his hand never leaving my back. Ethan was kind enough to join me. We were thinking of grabbing lunch at the Salty Dog afterward. Their chowder is the best in the county, he said it so naturally, weaving our presence together into a simple, domestic narrative. There was no apology, no explanation. Just a calm statement of fact. We are together. We are having lunch. I found my voice. I've heard good things about it. I added, looking at Julian, not at George. The simple exchange lasted less than a minute, but it was a defining moment. We had faced the first whisper of public scrutiny, and we had done it together. Julian hadn't hidden me. He hadn't hidden us. He had simply, calmly, been with me. As we walked out of the town hall and into the bright, breezy sunshine, the weight of my anxiety had lifted. He kept his hand on my back until we reached the car, a steady, warm presence that said everything that needed to be said. We had passed the test. Or rather, he had shown me that there was no test. There was only us, choosing to stand together. That evening, we sat in his living room, a fire crackling in the massive stone fireplace. The house no longer felt empty. It was filled with a comfortable, companionable silence. I was reading a book, and he was sketching in a notebook, the soft scratch of his pencil a soothing sound. He looked up, his expression thoughtful. I want you to feel that this is your home, Ethan, he said quietly. Not just a place you're staying. I know that will take time. He got up and walked to a small desk in the corner of the room. He came back with a single, newly cut key on a simple silver ring. He held it out to me. This isn't an obligation, he said, his eyes serious. It's an invitation. Come and go as you please. Keep your old apartment if you want a space that's entirely your own. Maintain your independence. That is essential. But know that you are wanted here. That this door is always open to you. I looked at the key gleaming in his palm. It was so much more than a piece of metal. It was trust. It was respect for my agency. It was the ultimate gesture of welcome, freely given, with no strings attached. I took it from him, my fingers closing around the cool metal. Thank you, I said, my voice thick with emotion. We had made a conscious choice. We were going to build this, piece by piece, with care and steadiness. We would respect our differences in age and experience, and we would not let his wealth become a cage for me or a burden for him. We would proceed as equals, as partners. The next morning, I woke up and went to the kitchen. Julian was there, at the stove, scrambling eggs. The smell of coffee and bacon filled the air. He smiled when he saw me, that wonderful, open smile that still made my heart skip a beat. Morning, he said. Hungry. Starving. I replied, and I felt a smile spread across my own face. I went to the cupboard to get plates, moving around the kitchen with a familiarity that felt earned. We didn't talk much, just the easy chatter of two people starting their day. He handed me a plate piled high with eggs, and we sat at the kitchen island, the sunlight streaming in. It wasn't a grand, cinematic moment. It was quiet. It was domestic. It was simple, and it felt like everything I had ever wanted. It felt like arrival. Watching the sunrise with him, sharing a simple meal in this kitchen that now felt as much mine as his, I understood what home was. It wasn't a place with a roof that didn't leak. It was a feeling of safety, of being known and accepted, of standing in the steady warmth of another person's care. I looked across the island at this kind, steady, honorable man who had entered my life with an unconventional proposition and ended up offering me the world. Not his money or his house, but the quiet, unshakable sanctuary of his heart. I thought back to the man I was just a few weeks ago, isolated in his leaky apartment, hoarding a worn newspaper clipping as a symbol of a love he never thought he could have. The loneliness, the fear of intimacy, the constant, grinding insecurity, it all seemed like a lifetime ago. Julian had used his resources not to control me, but to create a space where I could be free. Free from financial worry. Yes, but more importantly, free to choose. He had offered me a contract, but he had given me a partnership. The difference in our ages and our bank accounts hadn't disappeared, but it had settled into the background, becoming context rather than a cage. It was simply part of the story of us, not the defining chapter. He caught me looking at him and raised an eyebrow. "What is it?" "Nothing," I said, my voice soft. "Everything." A look of deep, contented understanding passed between us. He reached out and squeezed my hand. I squeezed back. I was no longer afraid. I was steady. I was home. And our story, the real one, was just beginning. Share your thoughts in the comments. What moment stayed with you? If the story resonated, a like helps others find it. Subscribe for more slow burn male/male love stories told with warmth and care.